Okay, so welcome to this week's episode of The Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol.
I'm Jamie.
And this week's episode is with George. George is a life coach who has moved from the corporate over to life in Australia and is a very great guy who has been super interesting as a contact for me, having known him for a fair few years, but very excited to share his whole journey and story with you, our lovely listener. Jamie, what can we expect with today's episode?
Yep, looking forward to getting into this one with George. Going to be a fascinating conversation. Firstly, we're going to find out how he empowers high-performing young professionals to expand their success beyond their careers. Secondly, we're going to find out the 3 major lifestyle changes that he's made over the last 2 years. And thirdly, we're going to find out how he thinks like a child and takes risks in his 20s.
Amazing. And if you are listening to this, one thing we just very much appreciate is we would absolutely love if you could just drop us a follow on our Instagram. We are at the Path Less Chosen Pod, and it would be amazing if you could just drop us a follow and show support for the pod. Thank you so much, and let's get into it.
Right, well, thank you, George. Appreciate you coming on and joining from Australia. To get started, I read on your LinkedIn that a lot of what you do is aiming to empower high-performing young professionals to expand their success beyond their careers. And I think we're definitely going to get into the how you do that. But I think to begin with, it'd just be good to understand what you mean by that.
Sure. Good question. And yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I think that I was a young professional, as we'd say, and a lot of my friends are still, or at least have been. And I think what I see is a lot of people go through their career and, a few years out of uni, they're trying to get up next promotion. Maybe they gym a couple times a week. Maybe they have a half marathon. But besides that, their life doesn't really have much purpose. And maybe they get drunk at a party and they start talking about this, or occasionally it comes out. But people used to have passions at school or at uni where they played guitar, they wanted to learn languages, travel. They're single, but they don't really think about it. And all these other areas of life, which actually is what life is, fall by the wayside because people focus so much on their career and maybe a little bit of fitness. So that's kind of where I step in and help them.
So I guess you're making them reach beyond and see that there is actually more purpose to life than work. But why is it, do you think, and this is just something that Sol and I have always discussed in this podcast because I guess it's kind of the reason why we started it, why do you think there is this kind of like society mindset that people don't start thinking beyond their careers in the first place and they need someone like you to help them?
Yeah, I know it's something you guys have alluded to before, whereby you go to school and it's all about get good grades, sixth form it's get into a good uni, go to uni it's get a good job. And at least in the UK, I think there are quite set tracks to go down. And then when you get to mid-20s, people start to have a little bit of a quarter-life crisis. So that's why I think people get to a point where they suddenly start debating what this like purpose in life is and where they should go from there. So that's why I think it exists.
Yeah. Okay, and then to take us right back to the start of yours then, I guess, because I think the journey that you've been on is really interesting, obviously, particularly. So tell us a little bit about how you've ended up in the role that you're doing from Australia when actually you began out in strategy consultancy, which is kind of one of the jobs that Sol, being a co-host of this podcast.
Well, it's been a funny journey. As you said, at the start it was very standard. Went to school, went to uni, and then at uni I knew I wanted to travel, so I did a gap year, as we say. And then during that time, I traveled, had a great time, but it was COVID, and so I kind of started looking and went to do a job in strategy consulting. That was then in London. It was wasn't really my plan. I wanted to travel and be open to doing something else, but kind of because of COVID, I came back to the UK and that was kind of default. So yeah, I did a few years in strategy consulting. I was going up the corporate ladder, which was fine. But then after a promotion at strategy consulting, I realized I didn't want to stay. You basically look up and the managers are working longer hours than you. And I was like, right, that's not the kind of dad I want to be, like the life I want to be in 10 years. So then I was like, all right, what are the other exit opportunities? Didn't like private equity or one of these things. So I went into a startup, which was cool. Did that for a year and a half, strategy there, which was very cool. But it was a fintech doing cross-border payments in Africa, which is all very well and good, but not really my passion. So I then was like, right, I want to do something which I'm really passionate about. Alongside this, I had this like other discourse going on where I'm always trying to optimize what I want my life to look like when I'm older as well as today. And part of it is like where I want to raise my family. My dad was born in Hornchurch in Essex. I was born in Hornchurch in Essex. So I was like, I don't want my kids to be born in Hornchurch in Essex unless I actively choose that this is the best place for it to be. So I did my dissertation research in California because I heard that was cool, but didn't really vibe it personally. And then I went to Australia just before COVID hit and was like, actually, this could be a cool place. So then I decided to move to Australia. And then the next question was, all right, when my rent's up in about a year's time, what do I want to do? I was thinking about starting something I was passionate about. And then I was like, right, what is this startup I want to do going to be? And then that led me down the path to eventually get to life coaching, which I guess I can go into if you like. But
Please, I think that's the natural
yeah,
next question, right?
yeah, I'll jump the gun. So then, yeah, about a year ago, we'd been to Australia and we were like, yeah, cool, we're going to move to Australia. What do I want to do? And then I had a think and I had a few rubbish business ideas. And so I flirted with the idea of maybe I go into like Entrepreneur First and meet a co-founder or something and use someone else's good idea. But then it got to a point about 10 people had said you should be a life coach. And every time people said this, I was kind of like, that sounds like complete rubbish. Like, what even is this nonsense industry? And then people kept saying it. And so eventually I was like, okay, maybe I should give this like the benefit of the doubt and at least look into it. So I did a bit of research and then realized, oh, actually, this does seem a bit legit. Like you might have a sports coach, or if you're an executive, you might have a coach. There does seem to be a gap here where people could benefit from this. So I looked into it. I did a course, took about 6 months, really enjoyed that, got some initial beta clients, got some good feedback and enjoyed that. And then I was kind of like, well, we're moving to Australia. It's a new chance, new opportunity. I'm 27. I have no mortgage, no kids. If I'm not going to take a risk and do something now, then when am I? So back yourself and go do it now.
I love that because we always hear people talk about passions, which is so cool, right? Like it's cool for people to talk about passions, but sometimes, especially like, we've all been there when you hear other people talk about it and it's so intangible. You're like, what does that actually mean? So I guess to develop almost a checklist for someone who's listening, who's like, okay, what is this passion thing that people talk about? So I guess you say first thing is someone actually, like, people were telling you to do something. What other methods or frameworks did you use to actually work out that life coaching could be the way to go?
I think I have always been pretty in touch with my passions, both in a like kind of diligent way, in the sense of I have lists where I write down the 10 things I love to do, things I really enjoy, and then I'm actually thinking, how can I do more of those? But at the same time, I actually have made a conscious effort to keep doing these things. A lot of people, I guess this kind of comes back to why I'm doing this, let these things fall by the wayside. But even my career path of like, my first job out of uni, I was working on a water sports resort in Greece. I was on 50p an hour. And like, I was a kids club rep, like face paint, like going in the water, like all these things, just following things that I think would be fun. So if you want a practical checklist for people, yeah, like sit down and write lists and like do them. And then if you actually follow your passions, I often think of like, if you see life, like time is linear, right? If you look at your life. And then you can imagine it as like a big decision tree. And at every like mini junction you get to, you have an option to pick something that aligns a bit more with your passions and maybe something that doesn't. And if you're like overly pressured by like societal norms or where you think you should be, you're going to end up somewhere where society or someone else says you should be. But if you keep taking little choices that align with what you enjoy, you'll end up somewhere where you really love it. So to answer your question succinctly, one would be literally write a list of things you enjoy and then actively choose to do more of those things.
Nice.
Yeah, amazing. I think it's such a good message. The whole idea that little choices, but everything contributing towards what, like, aligning with what you love, right? And that's what we're all about on the podcast. One thing that I've also seen you've written about in terms of alignment is part of why you qualified as a life coach was aligned to align with your Ikigai. And I think that's a concept that a lot of people listening might not even be aware of. It's actually weirdly one that I recommended the book recently to Sol. And so I know we're both aware of it now and something that we're really interested in. But it'd be good for just to generally explain it. What is it to people listening? But then also why that's been so important to you and what you're doing now.
Sure, yeah. So Ikigai is a Japanese concept. I think I've read the same book as you. It's like The Secrets of like a Happy Life or something.
Yeah.
And that's where I discovered it. But I guess, yeah, the first thing I spoke about was understanding what you love, your passions. And that is one of the 4 like pillars of the idea of Ikigai. And what it basically says is if you can combine what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, in the middle is your like real passion. Obviously, you might have things that you're good at and that you enjoy, like, I don't know, magic tricks, but if you don't actually want to take that seriously or the world doesn't need it, maybe it's not going to be a full purpose, maybe it'll be a little side hobby. Obviously there are successful magicians out there, but what I did is I actually was reflecting on all these different things, and that's where the answer originally that came to me before I started to hear these people saying about becoming a life coach was something around teaching, coaching, consulting, but there was actually helping people all through my strategy, like career, like corporate job. I was working on the side as a charity tutor for the Access Project, just like volunteering, just because I enjoyed teaching. And my original thinking when I was at uni was to maybe go be a teacher, but I didn't want to just do one subject. And so I was kind of floating around with this constant discourse. And then I actually tore my meniscus playing football like a year and a half ago and had a big surgery, which actually gave me, in a weird way, like lots of good things. So it gave me a lot of time to actually sit down and think and reflect on these things. And then by doing that Ikigai thing of like answering those 4 questions, you can then have an idea of what comes into the middle. So then I had this idea of it's something around teaching, consulting, coaching that actually helps people. And then I started to really hear when people said you should be a life coach, because that's how I think that, like, people call it like the law of attraction. I just think, it's just like what you're kind of in tune to. If like when you hear a new word, suddenly it's everywhere. I then was picking up on these things and being like, oh, actually, maybe there is something here.
It's so interesting as well that you clearly need to have an open mind, and having known you and spoken to you loads, in the past, you clearly have that open mind. But coach is pretty negatively associated with, especially in the UK. Life coach, on the other hand, like, how the hell have you dealt with people, like, telling people that you're a life coach, and what have the reactions been, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, I know it's something you've alluded to before, but in the UK there is a bit of a inertia-based mindset where people like to continue with like the steady state and security and the norms. So anyone who's not basically going into like a banking, corporate, law, consulting kind of job is seen as like slightly odd and making a bad decision. And there's often people that like care about you, like your parents might like actually worry about your security. So I think when you talk to people, they're kind of just thinking, okay, this sounds like you've, I don't know, gone off on a weird tangent in your life. Like, so people aren't that supportive when you originally start maybe commenting on it. However, I find that when people that actually care about you talk to, they're actually very supportive. So, and that kind of just shows you like who is in it with your and has got your back. So I think that, yeah, there's a bit of a negative connotation, but if you back that up with like actually backing yourself, and people realize you're not just doing this like whimsically, like obviously I've actually done the research and I'm not like going into this half-heartedly. So when I actually tell my mates from uni and stuff, basically all of whom are in some kind of high-flying corporate job, originally there might be like a little classic British banter joke, but then when you're actually like, oh no, like this is actually what it does, people actually kind of get on board and support you. And I think that one thing that I was particularly worried about at the start was like, what would my mates say? The classic thing that everyone thinks about, especially with things like posting online. And I've had this with lots of times, like becoming vegan, stopping drinking, which kind of necessarily didn't align with part of my identity. So like loving football and things, going out and things like this. But then you actually find that people tend to be more supportive than you think. So overall, I actually think it's been a slightly more positive reaction than I would have expected, which was nice.
Yeah. No, I love that, and it's obviously something that we've explored a lot, and we know that the UK kind of has this mindset. It's probably why we're even sat here doing this, to be honest with you. And also I'm keen to hear about the lifestyle changes, definitely. But just quickly on more on the life coaching side of things, is there like do you find like your own niche in life coaching, or is it always that all encompassing across all different areas of life, or can you find like a niche like, I don't know, relationships and then careers, I guess, which is kind of something that you're focusing on? Is that how you develop yourself as a life coach?
Yeah, so life coaching is a very broad term, and then within that there are different niches. And I often find, obviously I'm at the start of my journey, so I'm probably going to increasingly niche over time, perhaps pivot, we'll see. But it was easy to rule out certain things, so I knew I wouldn't become a spiritual life coach or necessarily a relationship life coach or like a divorce management life coach. There were lots of things that didn't really fit with me. Similarly, like health and wellness, like fitness type life coach, I didn't feel like I had the credibility or like PT science background knowledge or particular interest to go into that. What I really found a bit more interesting was helping people understand their like purpose, partly from a career perspective, but also balancing that with like that full 360 view of like, look at your life as a whole as a young professional and work on these other areas. So yeah, I think everyone's life is broad, and what I see with my clients is some people come to me and they're like smashing it in the gym, my relationships are sound, but like I've no idea what I want to do with my life, and my social life is like not great or whatever, or vice versa. So different people have different areas of their life they want to work on. So yeah, there are niches, and at the moment, I guess I'm helping young professionals with that full view, but we'll see over time.
Yeah. And then I guess a tricky question to answer, but is there ever a sense that like you feel a lot of pressure to live like some kind of perfect life so that you're able to kind of preach to them, or is it very much not like that? Is it more of a kind of back and forth relationship where you don't feel like you have to live the perfect life to be able to give them advice on theirs?
Yeah, good question. This was my immediate reaction when people said you should be a life coach. I was like, how can I be a life coach and tell people what to do because I'm in my 20s? And then I guess something I learned pretty early on is that life coaching is different to mentoring or consulting. Like if you're a consultant, you have like specialist knowledge and you tell someone what to do. You come in and you give them the advice. You say, this is what you should do. If you're a mentor, you're saying, I'm like 10 years ahead of you in X career path. This is what I did, just copy me. Whereas if you're a coach, think of like a football coach or something, you might not have actually played in the Premier League. You might not even be that amazing at football. But what you do have is like all the right knowledge of like the right training, techniques, tools, strategies, frameworks to get the best out of other people. So as a life coach, I'm not actually advising people because you'd start getting down really dodgy rabbit holes if you start telling people what to do with their relationships or like what jobs to take. What you're actually doing is challenging people, asking like insightful questions, really listening, and then helping them sort of like get the right answer for them out. So that was my original concern, was like, how can I be a life coach? Who's going to listen to me? How can I tell people what to do? But then I realized actually it's not quite about that, because the client is always the expert in their own life and you're just helping them actually get to the best version of what they think the best version of their life is.
And I think that's super interesting because I think most people that I speak to, like through my work, and the people that I speak to, obviously in a similar position to you, George, is they're like, why do I have to, how the hell am I going to help someone because I'm not Tony Robbins? And it's like, well, actually, sometimes it's a lot more useful to speak to someone who can relate to a few of your problems more and has been closer to where you are. Whereas I think a lot of people get that initial fear of starting because they don't feel like they're qualified to help people. So how did you get over that imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it's a good point, so. And I think that there's a couple of things you can do. One is, as you said, like if you just think about, well, maybe I'm more relatable because I'm more junior. Sure, it'd be sick if I was like Tony Robbins, and then I'd probably earn loads of money by like advising like high flying celebrities. But perhaps someone does want to relate to you. But I think one thing you can do is just like, they talk about it a lot in like the startup world, but like fail fast. So, okay, I was flirting with the idea of being a life coach. I don't know if I'm any good or if this will work. So I'll just give some free sessions to people and see how that goes. So I think just trying like a little something, like if anyone who's perhaps debating like starting some sort of business, there is always a non-automated, cheap, quick, dirty manual way you can test with your friends. Obviously, you have to be aware of like the classic mom test, like them just saying you're great because they're your friends, but just to like see if it works. And so that's how I kind of got over the imposter syndrome, was just giving it a whirl, basically.
Yeah, I love that. I think also to my question and to Sol's is probably the best answer I've heard, really, because I think I learned a lot from listening to that answer. It's something that I've always debated in my head. How do you just advise people? But the way you talked about challenging them, I think, is absolutely spot on. But what I think was also interesting about your journey, something that you've alluded to, is actually you did make a couple of significant life changes in terms of going vegan and going sober. So talk to us about how that ties in, and probably one major lifestyle change I've not mentioned there is moving to Australia. So those three things combined, why did you decide to do that, and what difference has it made to what you're able to do as a career now?
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's actually, I haven't really thought about it as them all being connected, but they definitely are. I think that whenever you're interested in self-development or personal growth, you have to kind of challenge yourself, and that becomes an easier process over time. There's this idea of like strong beliefs loosely held, and I think that if you can get to a point where you actually want to grow, you have to kind of go to your boundaries and push yourself and really challenge your mindset. So the first one that came along was being vegan. And when I was first year of uni, my sister went vegan for a little bit and she started challenging me. And I had all the classic arguments. I was like, what a load of rubbish. Where am I going to get my protein from? Nothing tastes good. It's going to be expensive. No chance. Like, I'm a guy, like, obviously I'm going to eat meat. But then at the same time, I was starting to do a lot more self-reflection. So it was kind of nagging away at me, and then I started to think, okay, well, if I want to actually align my actions and my values, what do I think about this? So I did a lot more research on how you can get protein, what actually happens to animals, and then it got to a point where I was like, I don't actually think logically I can back this. And when you're confronted with something like that, you either just like push it down and ignore like these thoughts in your mind, or you actually think, well, I'm actually going to live by my values. That took me like 2 years from my sister originally saying this to me actually eventually going vegan. I spent a year, as I called, a conscientious carnivore, where I cut out chicken and fish and I cut out dairy and just ate chicken and fish because I was like, okay, that's a starting point. So that was a long process, and that was because I was quite resistant, I think, to change because I hadn't done it before. Then as later ones came along, I found that I could be more open-minded to actually changing my views and challenging my values. So in terms of being sober, the kind of like kickstart was that I tore my meniscus and I had to go on blood thinners because I was on crutches for ages. And before that, I had not even questioned drinking. I was like, you're British, you like socializing, you have to drink alcohol, right? That's just part of it. What I was questioning was, how can I do this in the most like effective or efficient way? So I was like, okay, I'll make sure I'm drinking water between every pint and things like this. But you're kind of like scratching at the surface there. So that was then like a shorter process when I started thinking about it, because I came off drinking. Sounds like a drug. I guess it is a drug.
It is.
Because
I
of
guess it's true, right? Yeah, kind of is true, right?
because of my blood thinners. So I came off drinking, as we say, and then I could actively think, do I want to add this back in? And then with Sydney, I guess that's a bigger thing where I've always, as I said, been doing a lot of self-reflection, and I'm trying to think about, what do I want the best version of my life to live? Do I actually want to be raising my kids in Essex? Essex is fine, right? But I'm kind of thinking, I've had lots of opportunities in my life, been very grateful for them. So what's the best, the highest I could aim? And that's where I was then thinking about, okay, what's the kind of lifestyle I want to live? Wouldn't it be sick to live on the beach and go surfing and also have access to like a global city? And so that's kind of where Sydney came. So I think by challenging yourself and actually thinking through things, it does take time. As I said, it literally took me 2 years from being like absolutely no chance to then becoming vegan, which is, I still think, yeah, like that's a long time. Now, when I do actually confront like a dissonance in my values and my actions, I'm a bit more ready to change that. Obviously, I actually have core values that I stand by that change less frequently over time. But if something does challenge them, I'm now open to actually like reconsidering them, which I think is quite important for growth.
Yeah, amazing, and obviously some significant life changes, but no one can really argue that they're not positive ones. It's not like you're going down the wrong route. It sounds like everything that would probably improve your quality of life, but one that's, I guess, particularly interesting, and a lot of people listening I know have always kind of toyed with the idea. Sadly, I work in football, and there's not much football in Australia, as much as I would love to live out there. But one of my mates does, and the whole lifestyle, and as we alluded to before we came on camera, like, the lifestyle you're living seems amazing. So tell us a little bit about that. What is the kind of day-to-day life in Sydney, and why do you think it is important for people to consider moving out somewhere like that and maybe raising their kids there one day?
I guess the first thing that struck me is the day starts early. Like, everyone is up so early. That is a big change. So I used to think I was an early bird till I came here, and like way before sunrise, everyone is up socializing, exercising, and everything. So people get up early here, and it's very active. It's like the UK in summer, in that people are more inclined to just go out for a walk and like socialize in that sense. And when the weather is nice, you're more inclined to go for a run. So I think it does breed a sense of like activity. So days start early here. Most people exercise early in the morning, and then throughout the day, there's less of a binge drinking culture. So I think there's a lot more socializing that happens around run clubs or doing sports and things like this. And it's very normal to play several sports. In the UK, I think people might play one on the side. So that's kind of like the lifestyle. Personally, obviously, yeah, I get up, I'll exercise every morning. I've done that for like 10 years without fail. That's just part of my identity, I guess. And then I have 2 breakfasts like a hobbit. And then personally now, I'm doing work on the business. That's my main thing. And probably doing some sort of socializing in the evening. I'm still settling into the flat, so that's coming slowly. But yeah, I think in terms of Sydney in general, it's because of the lifestyle being so active and outdoorsy. I think if that's something that's important to you, it's definitely worth considering. If I were very into high fine arts, that's something that London's really good for, so perhaps I wouldn't have moved. And so Sydney kind of aligns with what I am really interested in and the place I would like to live in. And so that's why I sort of picked it. And it's interesting, I just remembered your earlier point about, do you ever feel pressure to be perfect person as if you're going to be a life coach? So I just remembered that as well as being not someone who actually tells people what to do, you're not giving advice. I did also think, do I actually have to be perfect myself for people to listen to me anyway, or pretty good? And what I've kind of realized is you don't have to be perfect, but you do have to grow over time. And that's what people care about, because people don't want to be perfect. People just want to actually grow. So you saying that reminded me that what I'm trying to do is just grow. And every 3 months that I look back, I can see that in pretty much every area of my life, I've grown and improved in some way. And that's what I can stand by and say. I wouldn't say I'm perfect. But you saying, like, it seems like those big changes were a chance of you growing, and that's what I'm actually, one of my core values is growth, so that's how I'd kind of see it.
I love that, and I guess, yeah, I mean, like, it's where it aligns with you as a person, like where you live, and I like the idea that it does align more with your lifestyle. And I guess moving on to the kind of business itself, how's it going now, and then what are plans for growth in the future?
Yeah, so it's early days. I think from what I've heard, starting a business is always just a roller coaster, and it's only been, 3 weeks now since I fully launched, and it definitely has been that. So before I left London, I did it on the side, got some beta clients, which was cool, and then I went traveling for 2 months on the way. So there I was doing little bits on the side, but I was actually trying to enjoy that traveling time. And then once we sort of landed a flat, I was like, cool, did a bit of work and then launched full time. After a week, I landed my first client and I was like, get in, this is going to be a breeze. Like, I'm absolutely bawling. Like, in a few weeks, I'll be like laughing. And then, like, didn't quite have the same momentum. So working on that acquisition now. So yeah, I think that, and I've got some interest off the back of that. So it's definitely a roller coaster. At the moment, I'm just really enjoying the fact that I have this constant project that I actually care about. Before, I think, and this is the case for a lot of people in corporate jobs, when you're working a corporate job that maybe you don't really care about, you can quite happily clock off at 5 or 6 or 7 or whenever it is and go and do the things you actually care about, and you don't really worry about it at the weekend. And that's a blessing and a curse, because sometimes there's times you're like, I honestly can't, I don't care about these icons or whatever it is. Now I do actually care, so it doesn't actually feel as much like work. I'm just quite excited to grow this and see how it goes. And also the fundamental endpoint, what I'm doing is helping people, and so that's something I enjoy. At the same time, I'm conscious that this is like quite a big journey and task I'm undertaking. But when I look back at my life, often the like upticks have been when there's been a challenge. So at the moment, obviously it's only been a few weeks, so check in a few months to see if I still say this. But when these challenges arise, I'm almost like licking my lips and thinking, right, this is a cool opportunity for growth. Because if I wasn't being challenged, I wouldn't be growing. And so I'm kind of like, at the moment, meeting it head on, and so far getting to good traction. But yeah, I'm excited to see where it goes in the future.
No, it sounds like an amazing platform to have started from, and I'm sure there's plenty of exciting times ahead and plenty more clients, that's for sure. But yeah, really interesting to listen to your something. So I'll summarise it all properly in a second. But I think from my side, I think I just wanted to understand your answer to the last question. I think probably the best time to jump back to as well will be when you were in strategy consulting. So from that point forward, what is one thing you would do the same, one thing you would do differently, and one thing you would tell yourself to motivate yourself?
Sure. So back when I was in strategy consulting, I think one thing I'd do the same is keep up my varied interests. So I think it's very easy to get blinkered and go down the route of, this is my career progression and I'm going to work on the next promotion, so on and so forth. But I think that if I wasn't tutoring on the side for that charity, playing football, traveling and surfing in the summers, I wouldn't have become a life coach, because by following my passions and the things that I actually care about, that's how I then started questioning, okay, what do I believe in? And if I wasn't actually fueling that fire and keeping these things up in the side, I wouldn't have had the kind of separation to question the like tracks I was on, and I would probably stay pretty blinkered in strategy consulting. So I think even the little things like playing football the weekend, going surfing, doing this charity work helped broaden my mindset and open me up to that. So that's one thing I'd do the same. One thing I do differently, I think that when I reflect on it, stopping drinking was actually quite a big thing for actually launching this business, because that gave me the like time and consistency to actually turn it from a vague side hustle that I would have worked on the odd Sunday morning when I wasn't that hungover to something I could consistently work on. And the reason why I probably didn't stop early enough was because I wasn't actually being critically tough enough with myself when I was really assessing what I care about and my core values. So I would keep doing more like self-reflection and personal development earlier on, because at the time I was just kind of thinking, oh, what are a few things I enjoy? Let's do that. But I wasn't actually challenging, do I even need to be like drinking when I go to these social events? Turns out I didn't. So maybe I would just critically evaluate what I care about from first principles more. And then one thing I tell myself to motivate myself, probably just like back yourself. Like I think Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or can't, you're right. And with all these things, like if you actually want to aim high, you have to aim high. And if you want to go somewhere cool and somewhere where you actually get excited about, you do have to think kind of like a child in a way. Like when you were a kid, you were always really ambitious and you didn't worry about realities and constraints that come with life. Picasso actually had a sick quote where he said something like, his mum said when he was a boy, if you're a monk, you'll become the Pope. If you're a soldier, you'll become the general. But I was a painter and I became Picasso. And if you actually want to be like that, like Picasso, like the awesome version of your life, you have to just kind of think like a child and be like, it'll work out all right. So I probably tell myself, just back yourself and don't worry about constraints and things like this, because someone else is going to go and live that life that you love, and you're not going to love living the life that someone else thinks that you will love. So yeah, back yourself and it'll be all right.
I love it, and I think we've caught you in a very exciting time for your career, because mate, few months, I reckon, few months, and you'll be definitely saying you're like, okay, I've now made it, I'm now loving it. So yeah, we'll definitely get you back on. But thanks very much for all the takes, and also great to have a fellow kind of English guy on who's doing something a bit different. Very inspiring to see. So thanks very much for your time, George, and yeah, we'll definitely get you on in a few months again, mate.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. It's been class. And I love what you guys are doing with the podcast. I think if I'd have heard something like this back when I was strategy consulting, that would definitely have helped sort of spur me in this right direction.
Appreciate it. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, brilliant episode. Absolutely love that. Great guy to get on. Fascinating to hear him. And as I kind of mentioned to him just there after we stopped recording, I think a lot of life coaches can maybe overcomplicate things, but it was really nice how he answered everything so clearly and everything made sense. I thought all of his answers were pretty spot on. So definitely someone that's going to be interesting to go to if you're looking for life coaching. But in terms of key takeaways for me, I think the first one was the kind of question that he asked himself, and what he's come to realize now, that if you don't take any kind of risk in your 20s, then when will you possibly? And then actually he touched on something at the end there in answering the last question, where he was talking about thinking like a child. And if you are in your 20s and you're kind of not sure where your career is taking you and not sure what path to go down, then actually just put yourself back in that kind of childlike mindset where you're dreaming of what you could potentially be and what you want to ultimately become. And then you can take that risk, because in your 20s is the easiest time to take it without having any kind of commitments and responsibilities beyond just trying to build a platform for your career. So I like that in conjunction with each other. That's probably the best kind of route and mindset to have if you are listening in your mid-20s and want to maybe take a little leap and take a risk and see if something works out for you, which it clearly is doing for him.
100%. And I want to add on my second takeaway to that, which is I love the idea that you should use litmus tests of what people tell you should do to be what you can find out to do. Because a lot of people go like, oh, I've heard the big new thing is to start an AI agency, or the big new thing is to start a social media marketing agency or something like that. And it's like, no, what do people tell you you're actually good at? And if you're funny, then maybe you should use something which involves your humor. Or if people say you're always really good with numbers, then maybe you should do something which is analytical. And it's like he almost found that so much that he was like, okay, great, like I'm gonna work out that and push that. So I like that a lot from him, and that'd be my second takeaway, to make sure that you listen to what other people say you're good at as a way to find that passion in that career.
Yeah, perfect. And another nice link to my third takeaway, really, which was the 4 core questions and principles of Ikigai, really. I don't think it's ever something that we've taken away or even spoken about on the podcast. And I think actually such a key way and a method of maybe analysing what where your career path should lead you. So to remind everyone of the 4 core questions of Ikigai that he spoke about on the podcast, which maybe you can ask yourself today while you're listening to this, is what do you enjoy? What are you good at? What does the world need? And what can you be paid for? And if you apply them and just answer all 4 of those questions, then ultimately you'll probably find something that meets all 4 criteria, and then you can start exploring that as a career. And that's a good starting point for anyone, whether you're 16 and like just starting to even think about careers, or you're 25 and you're hating the career you're in a kind of 9 to 5 that we obviously boo. But I think, yeah, those four core questions of Ikigai, an easy key takeaway to finish on, and the way that he explained them was spot on. So if you missed that during the episode, it's probably worth going back and listening to it, because I loved his answer to that.
Love it. Yeah, so I think, yeah, amazing. Takeaway, so good, mate. So first one, if you don't take a risk in your 20s, then when are you going to take it? Second one is important to actually listen to what people say, and that's a good way to find your passion. And third one is to follow those 4 questions of Ikigai, and they're going to set you in a pretty good direction. Okay, amazing episode as always. George, thanks very much for coming on, and you can check us next week on The Path Less Chosen.